One of the things we can both agree on is that no matter how long you've been in business, working with clients, or serving customers as a brand, mistakes happen. Sometimes an oops may be enough. Sometimes saying sorry may be needed instead. And other times, neither of the two may be enough, especially as customer expectations are higher than ever. But if you pause for a second and try to remember the best apology you've ever gotten, will that be an easy thing to do? Or would an example of the worst apology be easier to recall instead? Or perhaps even a situation that left you feeling bitter because you never got an apology from a brand? Whether you found it easier to recall one or the other, the thing about apologies is that they are difficult, uncomfortable, and often very hard to do. After all, mistakes ain't sweet. They can be extra bitter or salty for the recipient of any kind of apology, and even harder for the one expected to initiate one, because apologies force us to admit we've made a mistake or we've let down a customer in some way. But a genuine, sincere apology is what kicks off the trust repair mechanism between the customer and the brand, or any kind of relationship where humans are involved. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about over the next 30 minutes or so. If we haven't met yet, hi, my name is Ralitza, and I'm an email strategist and conversion copywriter for brands that dare to make the customer experience their unfair advantage. I'm also a massive geek when it comes to language, UX design, and of course, email. And during the short time we'll be spending together, we'll be taking a deep dive into apologies. We've just briefly touched on why they matter, so next we'll explore how mistakes and apologies are connected. We'll talk about how to avoid some of the most common mistakes any brand can make when trying to repair damage after a mishap, what lies at the core of effective, heartfelt apologies, and we'll also go through some practical tips you can keep in mind when crafting better apology emails. And finally, we'll wrap it up with some key takeaways. Apologies are part of a wider discussion on politeness, so they can sound very different across cultures. But in the context of email marketing for mainly an English-speaking audience, apologies tend to function as a form of self-correction or repair after a mistake, in the broader sense of the term. When customers make the effort to complain about receiving poor service or a negative brand experience, this is a clear sign of dissatisfaction. And in order to make things right, the service failure needs to be corrected and trust needs to be repaired between the customer and the brand. So, how we handle a failed or flawed service, how we communicate with and to our customers, or how we compensate them where appropriate are all critical components of successful service recovery and trust repair. When we think about how customer expectations keep growing over time and how easy it is to connect with customers across multiple channels, it's no surprise that those expectations are even higher when it comes to reaching out to support for help or to complain about a loss, an inconvenience, an unmet expectation, or any other issue a customer may be facing. It's also no longer enough to do the bare minimum when addressing customer pain points and resolving issues. When we constantly compare the experiences between different brands and how they deliver, the brands that raise our standards even higher will always be those that pay attention to the details and create exceptional experiences across every single touchpoint. Unfortunately, the brands that set high standards are the exception rather than the rule. Because even though customers expect companies to anticipate their needs and be proactive in their communication, the stats tell a different story, with most customers feeling like a faceless ID number and the overall experience a brand creates being just as important as the service or product they've bought. There is a huge missed opportunity in meeting those customer expectations. So when things break down somewhere along the way and when mistakes happen, the expectations customers have aren't met. Frustration and dissatisfaction slowly start simmering, and those same customers may reach out to complain or not. Because on top of the letdown and the emotional investment one has when trying to resolve an issue, complaining itself is a process that can take even more energy and effort. And if you consider that customers need to contact a brand almost 3 times to resolve a problem they've experienced, and sometimes never even hear back about their issue, making the effort to complain and request a solution suddenly becomes like a ton of work for something that the customer shouldn't be having to do in the first place. So going back to the connection between apologies, mistakes, and taking into account the compensation we can expect after a service failure, suddenly it's not just about making a mistake and then apologizing for it. It's also about the sense of fairness we offer to the customer after they've requested a remedy, the material and psychological compensation they can expect to receive depending on the situation, our willingness to take responsibility for things that are within our control, and being honest about the things that aren't. And of course, the factors of culture and politeness that can affect how customers perceive a service recovery and the apology that goes with it. When things break down and expectations are left unmet, rebuilding trust through the process of service recovery is critical. Speed, timing, and the way we interact with the affected customer will play a role in how they behave as a result of their experience and post-recovery satisfaction. Whether the customer becomes more loyal to the brand after a successful service recovery, however, is still up for debate. This phenomenon is known as the service recovery paradox, and according to research, it usually occurs in situations where failure is unlikely to repeat, or in cases where the brand has little to no control over the issue. So, if service recovery influences customer loyalty and retention, the way the recovery process is handled becomes even more important. Whether an apology is present or not throughout the service recovery process can also shape the perceptions a customer has about the service failure itself and how forgiving they may be in each case. In fact, research suggests that when service recovery is delayed, customers link that to an inefficiency on the company's side, which makes the apology lose some of its power. So, how can we rise up to the challenges that come with crafting meaningful, honest apologies as part of the recovery process and avoid some of the most common mistakes brands make? The biggest out of all is perhaps showing little to no empathy for the customer. This shouldn't be confused with sympathy, which is just the acknowledgement of someone's feelings. But empathy doesn't necessarily mean we need to feel the same feelings as the customer. Just being able to look at things through their perspective and their lens is enough to change the way we respond to a minor or major crisis, think more deeply about how we structure that response, and lean on genuine and sincere words we actually mean. When responding from a place of empathy, it's also less likely to come across as robotic, detached, or even to deflect responsibility when something is within our control to fix or prevent it from happening again. The other common mistakes are faking the oopsie, usually done to draw attention to something like a sale, and perhaps more serious is the lack of clarity around the next steps we can offer to repair the imbalance or the damage done. I may not see your face right now, but I'm willing to bet that you're nodding along as you start thinking back to all those apologies you've gotten in the past where words and sentences felt completely empty and insincere. Because no matter how many words of apology one combines, we can always tell a fake apology from a real one. The words, phrases, interjections, and any other language we use to express an apology can go from just a single word all the way up to a standalone sentence that can convey embarrassment, remorse, regret, sorrow, and any other emotional component that falls under an apology, from a short form to a long form or expanded apology with more than one component. With so many options to consider and with language as our tool, perhaps a better question we could ask is what actually calls for an apology? When is a longer, more comprehensive apology needed compared to a simple highlight of an oopsie? Whether it's a service, a product, an app, or any kind of customer experience, an apology may be needed for technical issues, downtime, security breaches, disruption of services, issues related to checkout or billing, miscommunication issues, as well as broken products or shipping delays, just to name a few. And while as adults we are perfectly capable of handling an offensive comment, a genuine apology for insensitive, distasteful, or offensive messaging can go a long way. The next obvious question would be how to deliver that apology. And despite the many different channels customers now have available to engage with a brand, and their desire for having options, email is by far the most preferred channel out of all options, followed by connecting over the phone or showing up in person where possible. As shocking as this may be to some, I have a feeling you may be hardly surprised considering that you're attending the biggest email event of the year. But apart from the benchmarks, tests, and all the other data sources you may have collected so far as a brand, when it comes to research-based guidelines on how to write and present an email apology in the best possible way, we're still not there yet. And while we can explore different takes from linguistics, the study of language, social psychology, consumer behavior, and more, perhaps an easier and quicker way is to find and study examples that seem to do something right and can help us avoid some of those common pitfalls we talked about. So let's take a look at a few. We all know emojis can grab the eye in an inbox full of text-only email subject lines, but when combined with a red emoji of a police light and all caps, it already looks too important to ignore. And the incident details included with this email are just as important as the steps Thrivecart has taken and the commitment to resolve this bug ASAP. Even when sending a follow-up email, it's still easy to locate in the inbox and get the latest updates on something that may have impacted your business. The email is relatively short, but the use of bolding can help guide the eye right to the most important piece of information. The combination of a genuine apology and expressing appreciation for the customer's trust in Thrivecart is also something that ends this email on a positive note that shows an ongoing commitment even when things fall apart. Minor technical issues have the most room for creativity and a lighthearted approach when handling those inevitable moments of oops. Addressing the recipient by name, adding just enough context, and claiming responsibility for the hiccup in a fun and engaging way isn't just providing a solution to a broken link, though. It also makes the CoSchedule brand feel much more genuine and approachable, and it also makes Jeremiah's response one we can relate to. Whether you're sending an email to a tiny list or thousands of people only to find out it looked nothing like what you intended or had vigorously tested, the heart palpitations that come with messing up are hard to mask, just as you can't unsee this epic template when you get it as an email. Apart from redoing the entire email and adding the apology in the email subject line, a colored box used as a callout just before the email content offers appreciation for those who wrote in to inform the sender about the email hiccup, adding a bit of context, an expression of embarrassment through the intensified apology, and other on-brand reactions without using emojis that may otherwise create visual noise. Here's another tech issue that's handled gracefully despite the slight delay. Infused with a playful, on-brand retake on the email subject line and the apology it starts with, here it's all about taking responsibility for the bug and guiding the eye to those key bits of the apology that seem to be most important to the reader. Resending an email with just the email repair that it needs can often be more than enough to fix an issue with a missing link, especially when the email is sent to those who haven't opened the first problematic email. But when sending the fixed email to those who've already opened the previous one, highlighting what's different at the very top, as we just saw before, can increase the chances of the subscriber spending some time with the email instead of just trying to find out what's different. Whether it's a short or a longer, expanded apology, clearly indicating the different parts of the email and making it easier to find the information that's most relevant or important to the customer is key. This is especially true when it comes to more complicated, tech-related issues that directly affect business operations. Plus, the best way to end on a strong note is by expressing a sincere apology and appreciation for the customer. Based on the examples we just saw, you may have already started to spot certain patterns. But if we wanted to craft an effective, honest, and heartfelt apology email, what are some of the elements we'd have to consider? At its core, a genuine apology will include an expression of responsibility and acknowledgement of the issue that triggers the apology, delivered in a timely, humanized, and transparent manner, all while being clear about what happened, how it affects the customer, and what the brand is going to do to remedy the situation. How all these elements are expressed, of course, depends on the occasion, but creating a simple set of guidelines can keep client-facing communication consistent when a mistake or a crisis happens. Another element to consider on a more granular case-by-case basis is the intensity of the apology. The more intense the apology we wish to express, the more likely it is for an adverb to be used as a way of emphasizing the intended level of apology. How the apology is structured on a sentence level also matters, just as the choice of words and the way these are presented in an email. Mistakes were made is not an apology, for example, because passive voice automatically removes the need to take responsibility. On the other hand, taking responsibility in certain situations may also lead to legal complications if not handled right. In some cases, the use of a text-based versus a branded email, personalization, emojis, GIFs, and even the packaging of the apology itself can be used where appropriate to make amends. And if there isn't a need for a full-blown public apology, a personal note to the impacted customers may be more than enough. But while research on apologies as a whole is not exactly in agreement when it comes to what makes the most perfect or effective apology, when we think in terms of the method we use and the context that gives rise to the apology, we may be able to find a path that feels right for the industry we're in, the customers and clients we serve, and the products, services, and solutions we offer. Because looking at apologies as anything other than complex and nuanced would be misleading to say the least. So when we take into account the impact of the issue or mistake and how it can relate to the degree or intensity of the apology, from cool to warm, we can visually pinpoint how appropriate and suitable the apology can be. Or if it's completely missing the mark, as it often happens when the impact on the customer may be relatively small but the apology is quite intense, or when a high impact issue is either neglected, ignored, or not addressed in an appropriate way for the customer. The intensity of the apology is a relatively small but critical aspect of the apology as a whole. When we consider what the basic anatomy of an apology with multiple components can look like, intensity can easily fit with the apology we express, but it's also something that can permeate other words we choose for different parts of the apology, such as how the customer may have been affected, the steps the brand or company is actively taking to minimize the impact, as well as the estimated time frame to fix things, and note of appreciation for the customer. Unlike recipes, where each ingredient needs to be added in the right sequence and in the right amount, the context of the apology is what's going to drive the choice of words, their combination and levels of intensity as a way to repair trust. And in this case, when there's been a scheduling mishap, it may lead to confusion, but it's also not as critical as a webinar or something that people would be majorly inconvenienced by, especially if they had freed up space on their calendar. So the relatable GIF, the facepalm moment, many of us can relate to, and the helpful tip for accessing Instagram Live, it all adds a human touch to this oops moment. In some cases, an apology from the CEO may be the right way to deliver that apology, but this also depends on the kind of relationship a brand has with its subscribers and customers. Including a video apology can also help create a more personal feel than just the words conveyed in text. The level of closeness is quite telling from the sign-off used, where it's not just Design Cuts or the DC team, it's your Design Cuts team. And for anyone who may not have time to watch the video, the header section instantly tells us what the email is about. In other cases, a lighthearted tone and a bit of self-deprecating humor can also trigger those moments of relatability when it comes to those inevitable human errors, giving it a positive spin. And while most extensions to sales are often very predictable, in this case, the copy itself and the sad-looking dog make this email feel genuine, and it can spark a connection with Retro Supply, unless of course you're picky on the dog breed department. This email is intended as a reminder for a scheduled downtime, but the apology just before the sign-off is an essential part of acknowledging the impact this may have on the customer. While making improvements to the back end can sometimes mean that downtime is unavoidable, Thinkific is aware that this can still be disruptive for their customers' businesses. So depending on the location of the recipient, including a local time zone could make it easier to plan around this downtime. This email could have easily been signed off as the Thinkific team, but combined with a greeting and the signature at the end, It makes it feel more personal, and it gives you a sense of the person who's behind the email, even if this may simply be a part of the email template. One of my personal favorites when it comes to apology emails is, unsurprisingly, from Litmus. Everything about this email is conversational, honest, relatable, and carefully crafted so that it can connect, provide confidence, and repair a mistake that may have caused confusion and perhaps even some worry too. It not only handles the mishap in a graceful way, but it's also tasteful and so well thought out that it's worth saving and keeping handy. So while the examples we just saw offer some food for thought when it comes to crafting honest and effective apologies, in some cases, an apology may need to do a little more heavy lifting if we want to restore confidence, repair trust, and decrease negative word of mouth. One of the key fundamentals when it comes to kickstarting the process of trust repair is offering customers the opportunity to express their concerns and dissatisfaction in the first place. And while what an optimal recovery looks like can be widely different across industries, customers generally expect an apology or remedy after receiving a suboptimal service. But in most cases, they get nothing. So while encouraging customers to voice their dissatisfaction is important, if less than half of those who've complained about an issue receive an apology, it's no wonder why customer frustration is on the rise. And if we think of service failure as the umbrella term that includes any kind of letdown a customer may experience when buying from or engaging with a brand, it becomes obvious how dissatisfaction can not only lower the chances of them buying again, but also push customers toward other competitor brands with the intention to switch. And while we can reduce the switching intention by making things right by the customer, that doesn't necessarily mean that it will positively impact their intention to buy again from the same brand. But if how we handle mishaps can indeed strengthen customer loyalty and minimize the chances of abandoning the brand and switching to another, what are some of the ways we can turn things around? The first essential step before anything else is to acknowledge the mistake. Being honest and transparent about what's within and outside your control is fundamental for repairing trust. Depending on the issue and customer impact, getting an apology from the CEO could easily backfire, or it could be just what the customer needed to see in their inbox. But regardless of who is sending the apology or signing off on it, what matters most is the level of sincerity that's baked into that apology. If you have the bandwidth and it makes sense for your brand without overcomplicating things, you can test variations of an apology for your most frequently occurring issues, or look at the data from past apologies you've sent out to your subscribers. While there isn't a specific KPI that can tie to how effective an apology was, taking stock of replies, unsubscribes, plan renewals, repurchases, or feedback surveys after a problematic event can give you a direction to explore further. All of these points, though, flow naturally when the mindset you adopt is one that's centered around your customers, because ultimately that's what interconnects everything. A simple formula to remember that ties perfectly with this approach is the CARE formula, offering a more empathetic response during a crisis. It starts with calling out the mistake, acknowledging the issue and taking responsibility for it, providing a remedy and an apology that makes the customer feel heard, and creating feedback loops to make sure that the issue has been resolved and that the customer is indeed happy with how the situation has been handled. Sometimes you may not need to go beyond the first step, and that's okay. Every case will be different, just as the type of repair, compensation, or apology offered. When you remember that no two apologies are the same and that the words you use reflect how you choose to show up for your customers, forging a language of responsibility is what's going to keep those words aligned with your actions and, by extension, with your brand values and your internal integrity compass. International brands face even bigger challenges because cultural differences can shape apologies and service recovery strategies in so many fascinating ways that we can hardly scratch the surface here. But if nothing else, it's always worth keeping in mind that if we give our words the wiggle room to mean something negative, offensive, or demeaning, even if that was not our intention, more often than not, those same words will plant a seed of discord instead of connection. So let's take a look at some final examples of apology emails that handle mistakes gracefully, inspire confidence, and try to win back trust. Pre-orders can be tricky, and when it comes to delays, apart from the expected apology, what helps provide clarity and reassurance for the customer is explaining the reasons for the delay, as well as providing an overview of what happens next. From the subject line to the image included, it's clear that this is an update you don't want to miss. And while this isn't a polished email in terms of copy or the kind of personalization e-commerce brands tend to use, it's still an email that feels honest, even if it's far from perfect or is sent out as a collective message instead of a more personal one-on-one kind of note. When it comes to SaaS and how big of an impact an outage can have on a business, things get a bit more complicated and serious. A short and specific email subject line, leading with the apology first, focusing the entire conversation around the customer, while also providing important details about the steps HubSpot took and why, are critical elements of the structure underneath the apology email. By offering a carefully crafted, extended apology, HubSpot is not only repairing trust by committing to do better, but also by leading with a deep appreciation, understanding, and sensitivity toward its customers. While technically not an apology email, what struck me when I received this was the scent of an indirect apology wrapped in a single promise to do better and to address the biggest concerns and frustrations Sumolings have expressed and AppSumo has listened to. And while in the case of HubSpot, the caring factor was still strong and permeated the entire email even though it was signed by the team, this email is signed by Noah Kagan, the CEO of AppSumo, which adds a little extra weight to a conversation that perhaps feels a lot more personal and honest. Finally, when it comes to unintentionally offending your audience, the best way to deal with this is by taking ownership of the mistake, which is highlighted in the subject line as well as in the bolded, front-loaded apology this email starts with. Of course, we could explore whether a text-only email could be perceived as more sincere compared to this branded email apology, including the inconsistent first-person pronouns, but the effort to repair broken trust around a sensitive topic is clear. And while this may have caused damage that could take a while to remedy, showing that the founder and her team are listening to their audience is essential for rebuilding confidence in a brand that has let them down. So, if we could condense everything we talked about into 3 key takeaways, I'd like to leave you with these 3 points. 1, when we get more comfortable with accepting responsibility, it also becomes easier to embrace a mistake with elegance, however uncomfortable that may be, and lead with transparency about what's within and outside our control, regardless of what the issue may be, and especially in cases where customers may have been severely impacted. Remember that leading with empathy will always open more doors and help rebuild trust in our brand. The key to empathy isn't emotional or over-the-top language, but rather a genuine understanding of the customer's experience. And finally, think about how taking responsibility can translate into the words you choose to use when forming an apology. Documenting different cases from low to high impact and laying out internal guidelines for any client-facing conversations you may need to engage in is something that can help you go beyond the soulless, cookie-cutter templates we all hate to get. No matter how big or small your brand may be, I've found that the most important mindset shift you could adopt is thinking 10 steps ahead in any situation. Of course, you can't think of everything ahead of time, but by being proactive and expecting questions, concerns, or issues that may arise in any situation, you can often catch the mistake before it happens, or at least be better prepared to respond in times of technical or any other type of crisis. We often talk about the value of knowing your audience when it comes to writing for conversions. But what happens leading up to, and especially after the conversion, is just as important for customer retention and building trust. So knowing what customers expect from us is key to initiating a meaningful repair when a nuanced face-to-face conversation is impossible, and we can only rely on a string of words on a screen. But even more important is to flip the conversation around mistakes and see them as an opportunity to improve our processes and refine the brand perception we truly want to leave our customers with. Because when we allow ourselves to challenge some of the ways we've been thinking about and engaging in email marketing, messaging, customer experience, anything really, that's when we suddenly gain a new pair of eyes and a fresh perspective into things we may have taken for granted or simply couldn't see before. And with that, I'd like to thank the Litmus team for organizing this event, and for bringing us another epic round of Litmus Live with 4 days full of amazing presentations by some of the finest people in the email industry. I also wanted to extend a big thank you to all email geeks around the globe for being such a warm and supportive community, and a very special shout out to Stephanie Griffith, aka Queen DTC, for creating one of the best tools any email geek could ask for. And last but certainly not least, you, for spending some of your precious time with me today and for honoring me with your attention. It's a gift that I never take lightly, so thank you for sticking with me till the end. On the other side of this QR code, you can grab a few companion resources I've put together for you, so you can keep them handy or use them as a starting point next time you need to put together an honest, heartfelt apology. No need to opt in, it's all readily available. And if you have any questions, geeky things you'd like to share, or simply want to say hi, please drop me a line in Slack throughout Litmus Live or message me on LinkedIn. There's nothing more exciting than connecting with like-minded and just as geeky people. For now, I hope you enjoy the rest of the Litmus Live experience, and thanks again for tuning in.